Have you ever felt truly invisible? Like your quiet efforts, your unseen battles, your deepest care, simply dissolved into the background noise of a louder world? Like your value was measured not by your heart, but by the clamor you made, or the wealth you displayed. This is the story of Jordan Lee, a woman who knew what it was to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to be utterly, painfully invisible. Jordan lived in a modest apartment in Portland, a city known for its vibrant quirkiness, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost muted existence Jordan inhabited. She was a graphic designer, a profession that often allowed her to blend into the digital ether, crafting visual stories for others, while her own remained unwritten, untold. Her days were a tapestry of muted colors, spent hunched over a glowing screen, bringing clients' visions to life with a quiet precision that went largely unacknowledged. She preferred the solitude, the calm hum of her computer, the way she could lose herself in lines and pixels. But this quiet nature, this gentle disposition, was often mistaken for something else entirely: a lack of ambition, a lack of drive, even a lack of concern. Her family, a boisterous and opinionated clan, often overlooked Jordan, their attention drawn to the louder, more outwardly successful relatives. There was her cousin, the real estate mogul, whose booming laughter filled every family gathering. There was her uncle, the lawyer, whose pronouncements were met with solemn nods. And then there was Jordan, the soft-spoken artist, whose presence was often noted only by her absence. This dynamic was most pronounced when it came to their matriarch, Grandma Elsie. Elsie was the sun around which the family orbited, a woman whose warmth and generosity were legendary, but whose health was slowly, steadily declining. The family rallied around Elsie, or so they claimed, with grand gestures and performative visits. Yet, it was Jordan, the quiet one, who was truly there, consistently, dependently, in ways no one else saw. She'd spend her evenings not on design projects but on household chores for Elsie, on late-night grocery runs, on navigating complicated medical forms that confused her elderly grandmother. She saw the cracks in the facade, the subtle shifts in Elsie's memory, the growing vulnerability that the louder members of the family either ignored or, worse, sought to exploit. Jordan's quiet love for her grandmother was a deep, unshakable force, a silent vow that she would protect Elsie from the storm of the world, even if that storm brewed within their own family. She carried this burden alone, a silent guardian, her hands wiping away dust, her voice a soft reassurance, her heart a fortress against encroaching anxieties. She listened to Elsie's fading stories. She remembered the small details, the little preferences that others forgot. Her empathy was a quiet superpower, unseen but profoundly felt by the only person who truly mattered. But even this profound dedication was misread by some, especially by Aunt Carol, a woman whose every utterance was a judgment, whose every gaze was a suspicion. Carol, with her perfectly coiffed hair and sharp, assessing eyes, saw Jordan's quiet nature not as humility but as indolence. She saw Jordan's frequent visits to Elsie's house not as acts of devotion, but as opportunistic invasions. The seeds of resentment, watered by misconception and self-interest, were already planted, waiting for the right moment to bloom into open accusation. Jordan felt the chill of Carol's disdain, the subtle slights, the whispered assumptions, but she remained steadfast. She had learned long ago that some battles were fought not with words, but with unwavering actions, with quiet resilience. She had also learned that sometimes the truth needed to be preserved, documented, held onto like a precious, fragile thing, until the moment it could finally be unleashed. The stage was set, the tension simmered, and Jordan, the silent observer, was preparing to rewrite the script of her own story, and perhaps the story of her entire family. She would prove that the quiet ones, the unseen, often saw the most, understood the most, and carried the greatest capacity for change. The world would soon learn that Jordan's silence was not an empty space, but a powerful, watchful calm before the storm. Aunt Carol's accusations were not a sudden eruption, but the culmination of months, if not years, of simmering disdain. Carol, a woman whose life revolved around appearances and perceived status, viewed Jordan with a mixture of suspicion and condescension. In Carol's world, success was loud, visible, and quantifiable. Jordan's quiet diligence, her humble apartment, her lack of ostentatious display, made her an enigma, and Carol, fundamentally, distrusted anything she couldn't immediately categorize or control. The tension finally broke during a strained family video call, ostensibly to discuss Elsie's ongoing care. Carol, perched elegantly in her designer living room, dominated the conversation, her voice sharp and cutting. She spoke of Elsie's finances with a possessive air, dismissing Elsie's own vague concerns with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. Jordan, as usual, listened, her eyes moving between the faces on the screen, particularly focused on Elsie's bewildered expression. Then, Carol turned her attention to Jordan, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You know, Jordan," she began, her tone dripping with false concern. "It's just, we all worry about Grandma Elsie. And with you spending so much time there, well, people talk. It's not a good look, frankly." Jordan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She knew where this was going. "What exactly isn't a good look, Aunt Carol?" she asked, her voice calm, a stark contrast to the thrumming anger beneath her skin. Carol let out a dismissive TSK. "Oh, come on, Jordan. Don't be coy. Everyone knows Grandma Elsie has a generous heart, and you're always there. It just looks like you're taking advantage. Lazy. Mooching off Elsie when she needs every penny for her own care." The words hung in the digital air, cold and calculated. Jordan felt a wave of hot indignation wash over her, followed by a profound, chilling clarity. Lazy, mooching? These were the very antitheses of her life, of her every waking moment spent ensuring Elsie's comfort and well-being. While Carol pontificated from afar, Jordan was the one cleaning Elsie's house, doing her laundry, cooking her meals, and carefully managing her shrinking budget, often dipping into her own meager savings to cover unexpected costs. The accusation struck at the core of her integrity, at the very essence of her selfless devotion. But instead of lashing out, instead of defending herself with the truth, Jordan remained silent. Her silence was not defeat, it was a strategic withdrawal. For months, she had been witnessing more than just Carol's veiled accusations. She had seen the alarming decline in Elsie's bank account, the suspicious withdrawals that Elsie couldn't explain. She had heard Elsie's confused phone calls, recounting pressure from Carol to sign various documents, documents that Carol conveniently managed to keep hidden from the rest of the family. Jordan's quiet nature had allowed her to observe, to listen, to piece together a disturbing puzzle that no one else seemed to notice, or, perhaps, dared to acknowledge. Every dismissive comment, every snide remark, every instance of financial exploitation had been carefully noted, meticulously recorded. Her graphic design skills, her innate ability to organize disparate pieces of information into a coherent narrative, had found a new, urgent purpose. She had started a digital folder, a hidden archive of truth, screenshots of bank statements, meticulously dated and annotated. Recordings of phone calls where Elsie's confusion was evident, and Carol's manipulation unmistakable. Scans of documents that Elsie, in her declining state, had unwittingly signed away. Each file was a brick in a fortress of undeniable evidence, built piece by painstaking piece, a testament to Jordan's quiet determination. When Carol's cruel words pierced the virtual silence, Jordan's response was not a burst of emotion, but a hardening of resolve. She looked at her aunt, her eyes clear and unwavering, a silent promise forming within her. "You think I'm lazy, Aunt Carol? You think I'm taking advantage?" she thought. "You have no idea what I've been doing. You have no idea what kind of storm you've just called down upon yourself." This accusation, this public humiliation, was the final catalyst. The time for silent observation was over. The time for action, for truth, had finally arrived. and Jordan, the quiet one, was ready to unleash a deluge. Jordan's difficult past was not one of dramatic hardship, but of insidious, slow-burning neglect that had forged her quiet, self-reliant nature. Growing up, she was the middle child, often overshadowed by a charismatic older brother and a demanding younger sister. Her parents, consumed by their own professional ambitions and a turbulent marriage, rarely noticed Jordan's quiet achievements or her struggles. She learned early on that attention was a finite resource, and she was rarely the recipient. This left her with a deep-seated humility and an innate tendency to observe rather than participate, to nurture rather than demand. This background made her particularly attuned to Elsie's vulnerability. Elsie, unlike Jordan's parents, had always seen her, truly seen her, since Jordan was a little girl. Elsie's kitchen was a sanctuary, her stories a comfort, her unconditional love a balm to Jordan's often overlooked heart. Now, seeing Elsie, frail and increasingly confused, being preyed upon, ignited a protective fire within Jordan that no one, especially not Aunt Carol, could comprehend. Jordan's secret double life was not scandalous. It was a life of profound, exhausting devotion. During the day, she was the meticulous graphic designer, meeting deadlines, crafting stunning visuals. But in the evenings, after long hours at her desk, her second shift began. She would drive across town to Elsie's modest home. She cooked nourishing meals, knowing Elsie often forgot to eat or simply couldn't manage to prepare anything substantial. She cleaned the house, ensuring Elsie lived in a safe, hygienic environment, something Aunt Carol, who only ever made brief, performative visits, never bothered with. She paid Elsie's bills, meticulously sorting through the mail, deciphering cryptic notices, and often, after noticing discrepancies, she'd call various companies to dispute charges or arrange payment plans. It was during these financial deep dives that Jordan first started noticing the alarming patterns. Small unauthorized withdrawals from Elsie's checking account, bills for services Elsie couldn't recall subscribing to. And most disturbingly, large sums transferred out of Elsie's savings account into an unfamiliar joint account, an account Elsie had no memory of authorizing. Jordan knew Elsie had always been generous, sometimes to a fault. But these transactions felt different, predatory. The first suspicious withdrawal prompted Jordan to start documenting. It began simply with a mental note, then a scribbled memo in a small notebook. But as the incidents mounted, and as Elsie's memory grew more unreliable, Jordan realized she needed something more substantial, more undeniable. Her graphic design skills, her precision, her eye for detail, became her most potent weapons. She set up a secure encrypted folder on her cloud drive, meticulously labeled and cross-referenced. Every bank statement that showed an irregular transaction was photographed, then the relevant lines highlighted in a PDF. Every phone call where Elsie seemed disoriented, or where Jordan suspected manipulation, Jordan discreetly recorded, using an app on her phone. She compiled timelines of Elsie's medical appointments, cross-referencing them with the dates of financial activity, noticing how often large sums disappeared right after Elsie's most vulnerable moments. It was painstaking, emotionally draining work, often late into the night, fueled by strong coffee and an unyielding sense of duty. She felt like a detective, sifting through fragments of a hidden crime. But the victim was her beloved grandmother, and the perpetrator, increasingly, pointed towards Aunt Carol. Jordan felt the weight of this secret, the burden of protecting Elsie, while also knowing she would have to expose a beloved family member. It was a heavy cloak she wore, shielding her true purpose from the family's dismissive gaze. But she knew, deep in her heart, that this meticulous collection of truth, this silent vigil, was the only way to genuinely protect Elsie. She was building a case, brick by brick, not for a court of law, but for the court of family conscience, a truth so stark and undeniable that it would shatter illusions and demand justice. She understood that silence, in the face of such calculated harm, would be complicity, and Jordan Lee, the quiet one, was anything but complicit. The situation with Grandma Elsie grew increasingly dire, her health and finances spiraling downwards in a terrifying tandem. Elsie, once the vibrant center of the family, became a shadow of her former self, her days marked by confusion and a deepening listlessness. She started forgetting medication doses, missing appointments, and her once immaculate home began to reflect her fading grip on daily life. Jordan found her grandmother more frequently disoriented, sometimes weeping softly, unable to articulate the source of her distress. Aunt Carol, meanwhile, became bolder, her visits more frequent, but always timed to coincide with Elsie's most vulnerable moments. Jordan would arrive at Elsie's house to find Carol leaving, a satisfied, almost predatory glint in her eyes. Elsie would then lament about paperwork Carol had insisted she sign, vague forms that Elsie couldn't understand, but which Carol assured her were for her own good. Jordan's blood ran cold. She knew what those documents likely were. The financial drain on Elsie's accounts accelerated, moving from alarming to catastrophic. Jordan, in her silent role as Elsie's true caregiver, was stretched to her breaking point. She was juggling her full-time graphic design work, her round-the-clock care for Elsie, and her relentless, secret investigation. She often skipped meals, pulled all-nighters, and felt the constant ache of exhaustion deep in her bones. The financial strain was immense. She was pouring her own savings into groceries, utilities, and even minor repairs for Elsie's house, as Elsie's accounts were repeatedly emptied. She knew she couldn't sustain it indefinitely, but her loyalty to Elsie superseded her own needs. She was living on fumes, but her purpose fueled her. There were moments of profound despair, moments where the weight of it all threatened to crush her. She would sit alone in Elsie's quiet living room after her grandmother had fallen asleep, surrounded by the mounting evidence of betrayal, and tears would silently stream down her face. How could family do this? How could love be so twisted by greed? The silence in the house, once a comfort, now felt heavy, oppressive, filled with unspoken truths and unanswered questions. But each time the despair threatened to overwhelm her, she would look at Elsie's sleeping, vulnerable face, and a fresh wave of resolve would surge through her. Elsie deserved peace. Elsie deserved justice. And Jordan, alone as she felt, was the only one fighting for it. She tried subtly, gently, to broach the subject with other family members. She hinted at concerns about Elsie's finances, about Carol's influence, but her quiet voice was easily dismissed, drowned out by the louder narratives. The pre-existing assumptions about Jordan being overly sensitive or too focused on details. No one took her seriously. Her calls were met with polite deflections, her emails ignored. The family's collective blindness, or perhaps their willful ignorance, solidified Jordan's conviction. If the truth was to come out, she would have to be the one to deliver it, unmistakably, undeniably. The meticulous documentation continued, driven by a desperate urgency. Jordan began to include personal anecdotes in her file: Elsie's fear after Carol left, Elsie's confusion over missing items, the increasing frequency of Elsie asking for money she didn't have. This wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. It was about emotional abuse, about a slow, systematic dismantling of Elsie's dignity. Jordan understood that this wasn't just a matter of exposing Carol, it was about saving Elsie, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually. The fight was no longer just about vindication for herself against Carol's accusations, it was a desperate plea for Elsie's safety and well-being. She knew that the moment of revelation would be explosive, that it would tear the family apart before it could heal. But the alternative, Elsie slowly losing everything, her peace of mind, her dignity, perhaps even her home, was a fate Jordan could not, would not, allow. The quiet guardian was preparing for war. The catalyst for change often arrives not as a heroic figure, but as an inescapable reality that forces awareness. For Elsie's family, that reality arrived in the form of a severe medical crisis. One morning, Jordan received a frantic call from Elsie's neighbor. Elsie had collapsed. Jordan rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding with a cold dread. The emergency room was a sterile, unforgiving place, the harsh fluorescent lights reflecting off the worried faces of Elsie's family, who had finally gathered, drawn by the gravity of the situation. Aunt Carol was there, of course, outwardly concerned, but Jordan noted the subtle shift in her demeanor, a flicker of something almost like panic in her eyes. Probably about what this hospital stay might reveal about Elsie's neglected state or her rapidly dwindling funds. It was during this hospital stay that Elsie's primary care physician, Dr. Aris, a woman of sharp intellect and deep empathy, began to act as an unintentional catalyst. Dr. Aris, noticing Elsie's profound disorientation and physical frailty, ordered a battery of tests. But beyond the medical, Dr. Aris was perceptive. She saw the distinct difference in how the family members interacted with Elsie. Carol's interactions were performative, her questions about Elsie's comfort laced with a subtle impatience. The other family members, while ostensibly caring, seemed overwhelmed, their visits brief and superficial. It was Jordan, however, who remained consistently by Elsie's bedside, her hand gently holding Elsie's, her voice a soft, reassuring murmur. Jordan effortlessly recalled Elsie's medication schedule, her allergies, her dietary restrictions, the small details that only true, devoted care could imprint. Dr. Allergies. Eris observed Jordan's quiet competence, her deep, unwavering concern, a stark contrast to the performative distress of the others. There was a moment when Elsie, lucid for a fleeting instant, looked directly at Jordan, her eyes filled with a raw, desperate gratitude that transcended words. "Jordan," she whispered, her voice frail, "my guardian angel." Dr. Aris, overhearing this, turned to Jordan, her expression thoughtful. "You seem to know Mrs. Henderson very well," she remarked, her tone professional yet warm. "Are you her primary caregiver?" Jordan, ever humble, nodded. "I try my best, doctor." "And her finances?" Dr. Aris pressed gently. "Has she been managing them herself?" Jordan hesitated, then decided to be subtly direct. "She tries, but she's been quite confused lately. It's been difficult for her." Dr. Aris's gaze sharpened. She had seen this scenario before. Elderly patients, vulnerable and trusting, becoming targets. She made a mental note to discreetly review Elsie's financial situation, understanding that medical well-being often went hand in hand with financial stability and safety. This brief exchange, almost imperceptible to others, was a pivotal moment. It was the first time an external authority figure, someone with the power to investigate and influence, had truly seen Jordan's dedication and recognized the implicit problems plaguing Elsie. It gave Jordan a glimmer of hope, a validation of her desperate efforts. But the true breaking point came not from the hospital, but from Elsie's home, shortly after her discharge. Elsie, still weak, asked Jordan to retrieve a specific heirloom from a hidden compartment in her old writing desk, a keepsake she wanted to pass down. As Jordan searched, her hand brushed against a stack of official-looking papers tucked away in a dusty drawer. They were property deeds, legal documents, all bearing Elsie's shaky signature, transferring ownership of her beloved home and a small vacation cabin to a recently established trust. The trustee, listed in bold letters, was Aunt Carol. And the trust stipulated that Elsie would live there for the remainder of her life, but Carol would have full financial control and the ability to sell the properties upon Elsie's passing. Jordan felt a cold wave of nausea. This was the ultimate betrayal. Elsie's most valuable assets, her home, her legacy, quietly stripped away under the guise of care. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about Elsie's dignity, her autonomy, her very future. The weight of her secret mission, the meticulous documentation, suddenly coalesced into a singular, undeniable purpose. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for the truth to be unleashed, in all its devastating glory, had arrived. This act of cold, calculated dispossession was the final, unforgivable straw. Jordan felt a profound sadness for Elsie, but an even greater surge of righteous fury. Carol had pushed too far. The group message, the weapon Jordan had quietly forged, was ready to be deployed. The breaking point arrived with the brutal clarity of a winter storm. After discovering the property deeds, Jordan retreated to her apartment, the documents spread across her desk, stark evidence of Aunt Carol's calculated treachery. She stared at the signatures, the dates, the cold legal jargon, feeling a visceral betrayal not just for Elsie, but for the fundamental decency of family. Carol's earlier accusations of Jordan mooching off Elsie now rang with a chilling irony, a monstrous projection of her own actions. Jordan knew, with absolute certainty, that Elsie had not understood what she was signing. Elsie's confusion, her trust, her very home, had been weaponized against her. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Jordan, a suffocating blanket of grief and fury. She had to act. There was no more time for quiet planning, no more room for hesitation. Elsie's future, her dignity, hung in the balance. Jordan opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a newfound speed and precision, each keystroke imbued with a fierce sense of purpose. She navigated to her meticulously organized hidden folder, a trove of irrefutable evidence accumulated over months. Screenshots of bank statements, highlighted with red boxes around suspicious transfers. Scans of the newly discovered property deeds, the dates aligning ominously with Elsie's periods of increased confusion. Audio recordings of Carol's manipulative phone calls, her voice sweet and cajoling as she urged Elsie to sign things, followed by Elsie's bewildered answers. Timelines of neglected care, juxtaposed with Carol's lavish expenditures. Every piece of the puzzle, carefully documented, cross-referenced, and ready to be presented. She started composing the group message. This wasn't going to be a casual family chat, it was a declaration, an unmasking. She carefully selected the recipients, every immediate family member, including cousins, aunts, and uncles, who had always dismissed Jordan as the quiet one. Carol, of course, was at the top of the list. Jordan began with a direct, uncompromising statement. Family, I am writing this message with a heavy heart, but it is a message born of absolute necessity and deep love for Grandma Elsie. She paused, taking a deep breath. Picturing their faces as they read the words, the casual scrolling turning into a sudden jolt of attention. For months, I have observed a disturbing pattern, and despite my attempts to raise quiet concerns, they have been dismissed. Now, the situation is critical, and the truth can no longer remain silent. She outlined the accusations against Carol, not as personal attacks, but as factual summaries of financial exploitation and neglect. She referred to the attached files, instructing them to open each one, to see the evidence for themselves. I understand this information will be shocking, perhaps even painful. But the truth, however difficult, must be faced. Elsie deserves our protection, and she has been systematically exploited by someone she trusted implicitly. The message was concise, direct, devoid of emotion, yet its implications were utterly devastating. Jordan attached the compressed folder, a digital Pandora's box. She triple-checked the attachments, the recipient list, the wording. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat against her ribs. This was it. The moment she pressed send would shatter the comfortable illusions, the polite fictions, the carefully constructed facade of their family. It would unleash chaos, but it would also, finally, set the truth free. Her finger hovered over the send button. A wave of fear, then a surge of fierce resolve. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about Elsie. She pressed it. Send. The notification flashed, a small, innocuous pop-up confirming the message had been delivered. Then, a profound silence descended upon her apartment, broken only by the hum of her laptop. For a few agonizing minutes, nothing. Then, her phone vibrated. Then again. And again. The replies started to flood in, a torrent of shocked emojis, frantic questions, angry accusations, and stunned disbelief. The first ripples of the legendary fallout had begun. Jordan sat back, her hands trembling slightly, but a quiet, almost serene sense of purpose settling over her. The truth was out. The storm had begun. And this time, Jordan Lee would not be invisible. She would be the eye of the storm. The silence after the message was sent was quickly shattered by a cacophony of digital reactions, a relentless barrage of notifications. Phones across the family buzzed and chimed, signaling the arrival of Jordan's group message, a ticking time bomb delivered straight into their hands. The immediate response was a mix of confusion and annoyance. Jordan? Sending a group message? She never does that. But as they opened the message, their casual scrolling stopped dead. The first lines, so unlike Jordan's usual quiet demeanor, immediately commanded attention. And then, the attachments. The family, spread across different time zones and lifestyles, began to open the files, one by one. Aunt Carol, likely at home, was probably the first to open the message. Her phone would have buzzed on her polished kitchen counter. She would have scoffed, perhaps rolling her eyes, expecting a polite update on Elsie's health. Then, as she read Jordan's stark words, her face would have gone pale, then red with rage. The attached files would have made her blood run cold. Bank statements, unassailable proof of withdrawals and transfers she had thought utterly hidden, scanned property deeds, legally binding documents that clearly showed her systematic takeover of Elsie's assets. Audio files, chilling recordings of her own voice, cajoling, misleading, outright lying to a confused old woman. The undeniable evidence of her calculated cruelty, laid bare for the entire family to see. Other family members, initially perplexed, quickly became engrossed. A cousin driving home would have pulled over, staring at his phone, his jaw dropping as he saw the numbers, the dates, the sheer scale of the deception. An uncle, a man who prided himself on his business acumen, would have seen the meticulous financial tracking, the indisputable paper trail, and his skepticism about Jordan's exaggerations would have crumbled into horrified understanding. They would have initially scoffed at the idea of lazy Jordan making such serious accusations. But the evidence was overwhelming. It wasn't just Jordan's word against Carol's. It was Jordan's meticulously compiled truth against Carol's undeniable actions. Screenshots showed Carol's lavish purchases, a new car, a vacation, expensive jewelry, all coincident with large, unexplained withdrawals from Elsie's account. The legal documents clearly outlined Carol's new trustee status, giving her sweeping control over Elsie's properties, secured under the guise of estate planning that Elsie was clearly too unwell to comprehend. The audio recordings were perhaps the most damning. Elsie's frail, confused voice, agreeing to things she didn't understand, punctuated by Carol's smooth, persuasive tones, guiding Elsie to sign away her life savings. There was one particularly chilling recording where Carol, after hanging up with Elsie, muttered to someone in the background, "Stupid old woman, almost forgot what she was doing. Lucky she trusts me." The shock rippled through the family group chat. Initial reactions were a flurry of disbelief. "This can't be true. Jordan, what is this?" "Carol, explain yourself." But as more family members reviewed the evidence, the tone shifted. Disbelief turned to anger, anger to a profound sense of betrayal. The carefully constructed facade of Carol, the responsible family member, shattered into a million pieces. Carol's furious replies began to flood the chat, a desperate, flailing attempt to regain control. "This is slander. Jordan is unstable. She's always been jealous." She tried to attack Jordan's character, to dismiss the evidence as fabricated, but the sheer volume and meticulousness of Jordan's documentation made her claims ring hollow. Jordan, meanwhile, remained quiet in the chat. She had presented the facts. The evidence spoke for itself, a damning indictment that no amount of angry bluster could refute. The truth, in all its stark, undeniable power, had been unveiled. And the family, stripped of their ignorance, was forced to confront the monstrous reality that had been unfolding right under their noses. The silence that had once defined Jordan was now filled with the roaring tempest of a family in crisis, finally forced to see the unseen. The family chat exploded into an unprecedented storm of accusations, denials, and raw emotion. Aunt Carol, cornered and exposed, unleashed a torrent of rage, accusing Jordan of forgery, manipulation, and a deep-seated jealousy. Her messages were punctuated by furious, capital-lettered denials and desperate attempts to discredit Jordan's character. "She's mentally unstable. This is a setup. She's trying to ruin me," she shrieked in text, her words a transparent attempt to deflect from the damning evidence. But the meticulousness of Jordan's documentation was her impenetrable shield. Each accusation Carol hurled was met not by Jordan's defensive reply, but by a family member cross-referencing a screenshot, a bank record, an audio file. "But Carol," one cousin typed tentatively, "the bank statements. They're from Elsie's bank, verified. And these withdrawals match your holiday dates." Another aunt, initially skeptical, chimed in. "And the recordings, Carol, that's your voice. We all recognize it." Elsie sounds so confused. The evidence was simply too comprehensive, too undeniable. It painted a picture not of isolated incidents, but of a systematic, calculated pattern of exploitation that had been ongoing for months, perhaps even years. The sheer volume of proof, coupled with Jordan's unwavering, quiet presentation of facts, slowly but surely eroded Carol's credibility. The family, forced to confront the stark reality, began to fragment. Some, loyal to Carol, clung to the narrative of Jordan's malice, refusing to believe such treachery could exist within their own kin. Others, horrified by the cold, hard facts, turned on Carol with a righteous fury. "How could you do this to Grandma Elsie?" one message read, reflecting the collective shock and anger. "She gave us everything." In the midst of this digital maelstrom, one figure remained eerily quiet: Grandma Elsie. Jordan had deliberately excluded Elsie from the initial group message, knowing the revelation would be too much for her fragile state. But the family, reeling from the shock, immediately converged on Elsie's well-being. Several family members, galvanized by the evidence, rushed to Elsie's side, demanding answers, wanting to verify the unspeakable. Jordan, anticipating this, had already prepared Elsie as best she could. She had gently explained to Elsie that there were some issues with her finances and that Jordan had been trying to fix them. She hadn't revealed Carol's involvement, wanting Elsie to hear it from others or to connect the dots herself in her own time. When the family arrived at Elsie's, distraught and carrying their phones displaying the evidence, Elsie's reaction was heartbreaking. She listened, her eyes wide with bewilderment, as they haltingly explained the financial discrepancies, the property transfers, the recordings of Carol's manipulative words. At first, Elsie could not comprehend it. "Carol? No, Carol loves me. She helps me." But as they showed her the bank statements, the transfers, the sheer weight of the numbers, a profound, gut-wrenching realization began to dawn on her. The catalyst, Elsie herself, was finally seeing the truth. She looked at the faces of her family, then at Jordan, who stood quietly in the background, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. Elsie's eyes, though clouded by age and confusion, suddenly cleared with a sharp, painful clarity. She remembered the papers Carol had insisted she sign, the vague promises, the feeling of unease she couldn't quite place. She remembered the times she felt subtly pressured, subtly dismissed. The pieces clicked into place, painful and undeniable. Elsie's face crumpled. A deep, guttural sob escaped her lips, a sound of profound betrayal and sorrow. It wasn't just the money, it was the shattering of trust, the violation of her most sacred relationships. She wept not for the lost assets, but for the stolen peace of mind, for the love that had been so cruelly perverted. In that moment, Elsie's tears became the final, irrefutable proof. Her heartbreak confirmed Jordan's story more powerfully than any document ever could. The quiet sentinel, Jordan, had not just exposed a criminal act, she had revealed a fundamental brokenness within the family, forcing them to confront their own complicity in allowing Elsie's vulnerability to be exploited. Grandma Elsie's heartbroken sobs reverberated through the now somber family gathering, her tears a profound indictment of the betrayal that had been inflicted upon her. In that moment, the raw, visceral pain emanating from Elsie silenced even Aunt Carol's last, desperate attempts at deflection in the group chat, which had devolved into frantic, unconvincing denials. Elsie's sorrow was the ultimate proof. Seeing their beloved matriarch, once so vibrant, reduced to such profound anguish, shattered any remaining doubts among the family. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. Jordan, the quiet, underestimated one, had not been fabricating a vendetta. She had been protecting Elsie, painstakingly, silently, while they, the louder, more outwardly concerned relatives, had been blind or, worse, complicit in their inaction. Elsie, still weeping, reached out a trembling hand, not for Carol, but for Jordan. Jordan immediately moved to her grandmother's side, taking Elsie's frail hand in both of hers, her own eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Jordan," Elsie whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "My dear girl, you saw, you knew. All this time." Her voice trailed off, overcome by a mix of gratitude and sorrow. This was the catalyst's profound transformation. Elsie, though initially a victim, became the ultimate authority figure, using her pain to spark immediate, decisive action. Her first words, once her sobs subsided, were not of anger or vengeance, but of a quiet, resolute determination. She looked directly at her distraught family, her gaze firm despite her tears. "This cannot stand," she declared, her voice surprisingly strong. "What has been done? It must be undone. Jordan, you've kept everything?" Jordan nodded, her grip on Elsie's hand tightening reassuringly. "Every single thing, Grandma. Documented, dated, organized." "Then we go to my lawyer," Elsie stated, her chin lifting with a newfound resolve. "Today. And Carol will answer for this." The implication was clear. Elsie was no longer a bewildered victim, but a woman reclaiming her agency. Her decision was unwavering, her pain transformed into powerful resolve. The family, witnessing Elsie's strength, shifted their support decisively. The tide turned completely against Carol. What followed was a swift, decisive legal process. With Jordan's meticulous documentation, bank records, signed affidavits from Elsie confirming her lack of understanding when signing documents, the audio recordings, the case was airtight. Elsie's lawyer, initially impressed by Jordan's preparation, became a staunch advocate. He immediately moved to freeze Elsie's accounts and filed injunctions to prevent the sale of her properties. Carol, stripped of her bluster by the irrefutable evidence, could offer no defense. The legal proceedings were agonizing for the family, but necessary. Carol was eventually forced to return the misappropriated funds and relinquish all control over Elsie's properties and finances. The revelation of her deceit stained her reputation within the family irreparably. Some family members openly disowned her, others maintained a strained silence. Regardless, Carol's influence over Elsie was permanently removed, her position as a perceived protector utterly dismantled. For Elsie, the outcome brought a profound sense of relief, but also a deep sadness for the shattered family bonds. Yet, she found peace in knowing the truth, and more importantly, in seeing Jordan for who she truly was. Jordan, the quiet, diligent caregiver, was finally recognized not just as a dutiful granddaughter, but as Elsie's fierce protector, her savior. The family's perception of Jordan shifted dramatically. No longer was she the invisible, soft-spoken graphic designer. She was the one who saw, the one who acted, the one who fought for justice when no one else would or could. The family, humbled and shamed by their own prior blindness, began to see Jordan's quiet strength, her unwavering integrity, her profound love for Elsie. The immediate environment around Elsie transformed. The atmosphere of suspicion and veiled manipulation lifted, replaced by genuine care and a renewed sense of vigilance. Elsie's home, once clouded by her declining health and Carol's machinations, became a haven of peace and healing. The truth, though painful, had indeed set them free, allowing for the slow, painstaking process of repair and rebuilding, with Jordan at its quiet, resolute core. Jordan Lee, the quiet graphic designer, was no longer invisible. Her meticulous documentation, her unwavering loyalty, and her profound courage had not only exposed a painful truth, but had also unveiled her own extraordinary strength. Her arc, from obscurity and underestimation to undeniable recognition and empowerment, was complete. The overlooked virtuoso had finally been seen, not for a grand talent that garnered applause, but for the quiet, consistent moral fortitude that truly changed lives. The fallout from the group message had been legendary indeed, but from the ashes of family discord, something profoundly positive began to emerge. Elsie, now secure in her home and finances, thrived under Jordan's continued, now unburdened, care. The constant anxiety that had shadowed Elsie's days lifted, replaced by a gentle peace. Elsie often sat in her sunny living room, holding Jordan's hand, her eyes filled with an unspoken gratitude that needed no words. The bond between them, forged in silent love and tested by profound betrayal, was now stronger than ever, a testament to the power of true, unconditional devotion. Jordan's role within the family shifted dramatically. Her quiet presence, once dismissed, was now actively sought out. Relatives who had once ignored her now reached out, not for design advice, but for counsel, for insight, for her measured perspective. They understood now that true strength was not always loud or demanding. Sometimes, it was found in the unwavering resolve of a quiet observer. Her meticulousness, once seen as a quirk, was now celebrated as a testament to her thoroughness and integrity. Her empathy, previously overlooked, was now recognized as a deep well of understanding. She became the unexpected moral compass of the family, a quiet leader whose actions spoke volumes louder than any words. Aunt Carol, stripped of her ill-gotten gains and exposed to the full scrutiny of the family and legal system, faded from their lives. Her attempts to mend fences were met with cold indifference. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. She became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the corrosive power of greed and the devastating consequences of violating trust. Her removal created a space for healthier, more authentic family dynamics to flourish. The environment around Elsie and Jordan transformed from one of veiled suspicion and exploitation to one of open communication and genuine care. Other family members, shamed by their earlier passivity, stepped up to help Elsie in meaningful ways, contributing time and resources, truly supporting Jordan's efforts. They had been jolted awake by the truth, and though the awakening was painful, it was ultimately redemptive. Jordan, once burdened by the secret and the constant fight, found a newfound sense of peace and purpose. Her quiet dignity remained, but it was now imbued with an undeniable confidence. She continued her graphic design work, but now with an added layer of purpose, knowing that her skills of precision and organization could be used for good, for truth. She understood that her quiet nature was not a weakness, but a strength, allowing her to observe, to process, to act with a clarity that others missed. The experience had made her a catalyst for positive change in her own life, and in the lives of those she loved. She had taught her family, and inadvertently, everyone around them, that true worth is not measured by volume or by status, but by integrity, by kindness, and by the courage to stand for what is right, even when doing so means facing the storm alone. Her story served as a powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or make grand speeches. Sometimes they quietly compile evidence, protect the vulnerable, and unleash the truth in a single, life-altering group message. the invisible woman had become undeniably seen, a beacon of quiet power and unwavering integrity. And so, we see the profound truth of Jordan Lee's journey, that the greatest strength often resides not in the loudest voices, but in the quietest, most observant hearts. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that integrity, diligence, and unwavering love, even when unseen, possess an undeniable, transformative power. Jordan's quiet dedication to Elsie, her meticulous documentation of betrayal, was not a vengeful act, but a profound act of love and justice. She reminds us that true worth is not always recognized by the world's clamor, but by the quiet, consistent choices we make when no one is watching. She proved that the silent sentinel, diligently watching, painstakingly preparing, can bring about a legendary fallout that ultimately cleanses and heals. Her arc, from the overlooked graphic designer to the family's moral compass, demonstrates that often, those who seem to blend into the background are the very ones who see the most clearly, feel the most deeply, and have the courage to act when it truly matters. They are the hidden gems, whose intrinsic value shines brightest when illuminated by truth. So, what silent battles are being fought around you? What unseen efforts are unfolding, unacknowledged, in the lives of those you encounter? Are you truly seeing the quiet ones, the diligent souls whose contributions might be overlooked simply because they don't demand attention? This story is a heartfelt invitation to look closer, to listen deeper, to appreciate the quiet strength that often sustains our world. It's a reminder that judging a person's worth by their outward display, by their social media presence, or by the volume of their voice, can lead us to overlook the very individuals who hold the greatest capacity for love, for integrity, and for positive change. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their quiet strength is their superpower. Comment below and tell us about a time you, or someone you know, went from being overlooked to being rightfully recognized. Let Jordan's journey inspire us all to champion the truth, to protect the vulnerable, and to always, always see the hidden gems among us. Remember, sometimes the most profound changes begin not with a bang, but with a quiet, resolute click of a send button, unleashing a truth that sets everyone free.